Hello and welcome to Prince George Up Close. I'm your host, Grant Bachand. This is the show where we sit down in one-on-one conversations with this community's movers and shakers. I am very excited today to have the Superintendent of School District 57, Marilyn Marquis-Forster. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well, thanks, Grant.
So I want to start off by talking and getting to know you. You're welcome to Prince George. You know, you're new here and we're very excited to have you. What made you come to our community? What drew you to Prince George, and where are you from here?
Okay, well, I think it's month 15 I'm into now in the community, and I came for the position of superintendent. Prior to that, I served for 8 years as superintendent in Swan Valley School Division in Manitoba, and before that I had district responsibility for program and assessment with Hamilton Wentworth District School Board in Southern Ontario.
So it's quite you went from Ontario where in Hamilton it's quite an urban community, quite a connected, very small, I would not say small, but probably everyone's pretty close and urban in that area too. How has been the transition for you going from there to here?
Well, like many Canadians, we travel for work experiences, and I started life on a farm north of Toronto and did teacher training at University of Toronto, which is very large. And then traveled in the 80s to Edmonton because there were jobs. I was a teacher, and Southern Ontario wasn't hiring at that time. Alberta certainly was. That's where I did my graduate work at the University of Alberta. And then for family reasons, we traveled back to Southern Ontario. So I've had rural and urban. Certainly Swan Valley School Division was agricultural and forestry. So a bit of a combination of both. And I did have one summer while I was in university working in Chetwynd Hudson Hope here in British Columbia. So like many Canadians, if there's an interesting job somewhere in Canada, we're often interested in traveling to do it.
So here in Prince George, and especially McBride and these other rural areas, what has that been like for you? And I read somewhere that you've been trying to go out to all the schools and trying to visit them quite a bit. How has that been with you in this area, in this rural community, with you doing that outreach, especially to other communities?
I was very fortunate in the fall of 2016, so a year ago now. I did set out to make sure I got into every school, and that of course included our 2 schools in McBride, our 2 schools in Valemount, and our 2 schools in Mackenzie, as well as, let's not forget, Hickson and Giscombe, where we actually have our smallest numbers of students in a school. And of course we've got Nuco Lake and Pineview, and we have some schools in the Fraser District as well. It was a pleasure to get into all of the buildings and to see those school communities in operation, and I was able to meet with parent groups actually in McBride. It was a lot of work, absolutely essential. I needed to know where every school was and to put names and faces to buildings and to see the communities. Our outlying communities here, our rural communities, are very similar to communities that I served in Manitoba. Fiercely proud, absolutely committed to their area, and absolutely committed to the success of their children. And that's always a good thing to serve.
Do you find that it brings unique challenges with those schools, unique things that you would not see in Prince George maybe? Every school and every school community has its own unique challenges, and certainly we have a bit of a dichotomy here in SD 57 because the vast majority of our population is centered in the greater Prince George area, even as I reference Giscombe and Hickson, pretty close into the city, whereas we're 2.5 or 3 hours from the other communities. Mackenzie is interesting because it's sometimes called rural. It's actually not a rural community. It's an urban community, but it's somewhat remote. You have to drive a couple of hours or so to get to the next city. That's interesting. McBride, of course, does have agriculture. Valemount has agriculture, mountain tourism. The Robson Valley certainly has unique geographic features. It's beautiful. You can see why people are so proud of it. It's important to let each community character speak for itself and its own challenges speak for itself, because they all have their own identity.
Mm-hmm. You know, when I think about right now some of the things that I would assume that you're sort of working with right now, especially this school year, it was the Supreme Court decision that came down, and to with all the hirings of teachers that have been happening all across British Columbia, in response to that Supreme Court decision, what has been School District 57's response to that? How have we been managing so far?
Well, we've been managing very well compared to some districts in the province, and I would say we've been managing very well in our service to students. Of course, the decision was prior to Christmas. The first government infusion of dollars came for second semester, and we had an interim plan where we had additional teachers go in, and we were finding those teachers and working with our union leadership to meet the conditions that they had agreed to at that point. And then very quickly and perhaps unexpectedly in March of 2017, a memorandum of agreement was reached. And the next thing we knew, we were going to be expected to be in compliance with our 2002 collective agreement as of September 2017. That's a very short turnaround, and our staff from the very beginning wanted to work in goodwill and productively with our union leaders to do the best we could to meet that deadline. It was a deadline, September. So as a staff, we took a look at where we were at, and what happens when the number of teachers who are teaching in, say, the primary area is increased. You need to have new classroom space, because if you previously had 22 students in a classroom and now you have 20, every 2 extra students, they add up pretty quickly to another classroom. And so that's, of course, what we saw happen. Prince George is experiencing some growth north of the Nechako. The Heart area has some population growing without the Supreme Court decision. And then when we added that and truly looked at each school, its enrollment, and how many classrooms would be needed, we needed more space. And so facility services and senior leaders took a look at it and said, oh my goodness, this would be 10 portables that we'd need in the Heart. Portables aren't always a good solution. The whole province is scrambling for portables.
We hear a lot in the southern.
Yes.
Yeah,
What are we going to do with these students? So we took a look at all options, and of course, a new school can't be built in 6 months. But we did have Springwood sitting. It hadn't been used for 6 or 7 years, but it had been maintained at a certain standard, and our facility services took a look at it and said, we believe we could have it back in operation. So there was funding from the government at that point that we could apply for if we were needing to add space, so we got that busy, and we had to take it forward to our trustees. They were very receptive, but also a little bit hesitant, like, really in 6 months can we do this? And they looked carefully, and what was the alternative? Well, it wasn't very good. So they gave us the go-ahead, and we hosted community meeting in the Heart and had lots of concerned folks out and tried to answer the questions as best we could and went forward. And then, when everything looked like this was going to be okay, British Columbia started to burn in the summer. And Prince George was, of course, an evacuation site, and our school district was part of helping out with that. So some of our staff who were working on getting Springwood ready were now working on turning our schools into veterinary type facilities for pets and so on. We had
You took a lot of animals then?
We did. We worked. Peden Hill became a sanctuary for pets. Of course, evacuees have pets and they need to be somewhere and so on. So it was quite complicated. But anyway, when we got that all done, our facility folks went back at it, and sure enough, we opened in September in Springwood to great success. So that was a huge project that was a direct result of the Supreme Court decision. We have added 63
additional full-time teaching equivalents to our teaching ranks. And the last time I checked with Human Resources, we had maybe 3 part-time positions that we still had not been able to fill. So we've done very, very well.
So thinking about so obviously we've been doing pretty well with so far with adapting the Supreme Court decision and everything, and we're seeing obviously a lot of students are probably very excited about this, especially those who are going into the education industry or field. One of the things that I've heard a lot from my colleagues and my friends up at university is that education has changed a lot. It's changed a lot in this last little bit here, especially with how we deliver curriculum. And from what my understanding is, and I hope you could elaborate on this, we've shifted away from the BC government giving us a lot of exactly what we need to teach to this big idea sort of model. What does that mean for the education of, say, I have a kid about to go into kindergarten? What does that mean for them?
Well, hopefully it means really exciting things for your child who's coming into kindergarten. British Columbia started on the journey to its transformation in curriculum in 2013. So we're quite a ways down the road toward that change. And the attempt, of course, is to equip our students to thrive in the future. And we know in the 21st century that we probably don't know everything our students are going to need to do 10 years from now, let alone 20 or 30. The children entering school now, believe it or not, they'll still be in the workforce in 2050. It's quite a thought, right? So how do school systems attempt to prepare folks for a future we really don't understand? And the transformed curriculum is one of the responses to that. And a shift to big ideas and to competencies and to being adaptive and flexible as learners and as doers is an attempt to respond to that challenge. It may be that 60 years ago, excuse me, if you memorized a lot of facts, that was a good thing. And there are still some facts we need to memorize. Our vocabulary words, we need to know basic algorithms in mathematics. Nothing is going to make it easier in mathematical thinking than to know your times tables cold and to understand addition and subtraction. Some of that, of course, absolutely remains. But it's more important to know where to go to find information, how to ask really good questions.
Critical thinking.
Critical thinking, how to judge, is that piece of information that I just took from the internet credible? Should I believe it? And I think it's never been more important to teach students to weigh, where did this information come? Who was the audience it was intended for? How does that play in? What biases might be there?
The fake news sort of thing, right?
Well, that's a whole other topic, but absolutely. It's never been so critical for our students to have that as a vital skill, because how are they going to be able to make good decisions if they're not equipped to go forward with a good set of skills around how do I judge about this and what values underlie my decision making. We, in the big ideas, are firmly rooted in Canadian ethics, which are grounded in human rights and in law and in a general belief that we have lots of rights and freedoms and we do not take those at the expense of someone else. That's a good way to sum it up. That's an important underlying concept if we're truly producing that educated citizen and the kind of future that, you know, when we're old and in the hospice, we hope the people taking care of us have embraced.
When I talk to some of my fellow friends who are going into the education programs, one of the things I hear is that there's a little bit more wiggle room with the big ideas for the teachers to generate the content, to sort of allow for them to have a little bit more say in the classroom. Is that kind of where we're drifting towards, is more teacher control in the classroom?
Well, I don't know if I would call it teacher control. I think I would call it teacher decision making and teacher influence and teacher design. The curriculum is quite clear as to what students need to achieve, what they need to know, what they need to be able to do. The novel you choose to get them to a skill of inference with reading fiction could be very much up
up to the teacher. And there might be a time that curriculum was so prescribed that those novels were listed for each grade, and there may still be suggested lists because there may be themes that are part of the curriculum. But we certainly want our teachers to exemplify everything that we're trying to have students achieve. So our teachers are equipped to begin with the learner and what is it I need to bring here and what's going to capture this group of students and how would I move this group of students toward that understanding. I would argue we've always asked that of teachers. We talk about the multi-grade classroom today as if it's a new invention, but if you go back in Canada to the 1940s, many Canadians were still being educated in a one-room schoolhouse, and there were 8 grades in that schoolhouse in one class. And so the notion of multi-age and multi-disciplined groups of people learning together is not, it's not new. It may be reinvented a bit in the 21st century, but that has been a Canadian context throughout time.
When I think about education, one of the things that I know, especially with my friends down in the States, and I hear a lot from there, it's obviously quite different than here in Prince George and British Columbia, but do the challenges of making sure that when you go to school in, say, college, CHSS, the College Heights Secondary School, or going to a school that might be in a lower economic area or a more rural area, making sure that there's more even distribution of those outcomes for those students, making sure that one school doesn't leap ahead further than the other students. Is that something that we wrangle with here in Prince George? Like, I've heard that that might be something that we sometimes a challenge.
Equity of learning outcome for students is always a value. It's always the priority. It's always a goal in public education, at least in the last 25, 30 years. You will hear ministries speak about it. You will hear districts speak about it. You'll certainly hear educational leaders speak about it. We are fortunate in Canada that our equity is pretty good compared to the world stage, absolutely, and perhaps compared to our neighbors to the south. We have a robust public education system, and actually European countries and other countries from different continents look to Canada to see a model of how we do that. Having said that, it's always a target. It's always a goal. And one of the ways we ensure that is we have certified teachers in the province of British Columbia. You mentioned some of your friends studying to be teachers. We have very high standards for professional teaching, and we certify professional teachers, and Canadians count on, if I'm in a public school, my child will be taught by a certified teacher. That teacher will have qualified for that job, and so on. So those are safeguards. Taxpayer money that's invested in public education is transparent as far as where we spend dollars and how we spend dollars, and we have targeted funds. We don't like to think of children as being a target, but we do have dollars that are allocated for specific purposes, for instance, for children who have particular identified needs, or in British Columbia for students whose parents have identified as Indigenous. We have funds that come to us, and then a responsibility to report how we've spent them, and an obligation that how we're doing with those dollars is published. So those are all mechanisms to attempt to ensure that if our children go to a Canadian school, they have the opportunity for a Canadian education. We know from the post-secondary sector that we have good consistency across the country as far as quality of what a person would gain at a college program or university program or an apprenticeship, that there's good articulation across the nation.
You know, I'm glad that you brought up Indigenous, because one of the questions that I've always had, and we see with graduation rates, we see a massive discrepancy between non-Aboriginal people and Indigenous groups in their graduation rates. I was checking out some of the statistics, and we're seeing them in the 50s, some in the 60s for Aboriginal, as is classified there, and in the 90s and the 80s in some areas, but generally in the 90s for non-Aboriginal. So, and this is probably a theme that we see across Canada, but like, how do we deal with this in School District 57? How do we just deal with shrinking that gap?
Well, in School District 57, shrinking that gap is very much a priority and has been for the last 10 years. And our gap between graduation rates for Indigenous and non-Indigenous has been closing.
In the last 5 years, we saw a 5 percentage point gain in our Indigenous students over the last 5 years, so on average an extra % each year. We're not satisfied with that until there is no gap. Given the history of Indigenous people and colonizing peoples in Canada, it's not surprising that there is a gap. We've had very different histories bringing us to 2017. And any dealings I've had with Indigenous groups, Indigenous leaders, individual Indigenous parents, and non-Indigenous leaders, groups, and parents, we all want the same thing for our children, and that is for them to be well educated, to reach their potential, to have choices post-secondary. We all share those same goals. I think it's an extremely exciting time to be working in the area of Aboriginal education in 2017. We've had good gains, we've got good momentum, and we've got great people working for it.
You know, one of the things that I want to have a conversation about is looking at what is like for LGBTQ to individuals and students and young people who are coming into the school system. You know, it's something that's shifted a lot. Even when I was in school, it was still shifting as well. Is that being more curating safe spaces, being more open, being aware of especially transgender and the aspects that come with that. How does school districts work with keeping up to make sure that all students feel welcome in a school and the students don't feel like there's walls or barriers to their education?
Well, as a district, if you're speaking specifically to the SOGI community, we do have policy, and it's policy built on human rights. And our goal is to simply welcome and find success for every student who comes to us. So that's not to a particular community, that's to any student who comes in. We believe that every student can learn. We believe we are public education, and each student has a right to come there, to be welcomed, appreciated as an individual, and for us to come to know that student as a learner and to provide programming that's appropriate for that learner, and so on. Promoting that acceptance, that inclusion, which of course is part of British Columbia education, is part of how we do school. It is hopefully something that children experience from the moment they walk in, that they're in a pretty safe place and who I am is good.
But bullying can be a challenge on that. And bullying is changed. Like we've seen cyberbullying and, you know, school students are still feeling victimized in schools, and I understand that's difficult to address at your level at the superintendent thing, but it seems like we still have a mountain to climb in many ways.
Well, we may have mountains to climb, and certainly it does require work on the part of every adult in a school to assist students and to ensure that we're promoting behavior in children and youth that does not condone bullying. We have a number of programs. Every one of our schools has within their school plans, it could be called anti-bullying, or we call it social emotional development, the welfare of students, and so on. We have policies that say it can't happen. We have ways that students can appeal, and so on. It's always critical in our schools that the adults lead by example. We're always the most powerful teacher when we're leading by example, and we expect that of our staff. We make a commitment to address bullying when it's identified. And so I would hope that no student in School District 57 who goes to someone for assistance doesn't receive it. I mean, that is the goal and the plan. We know that it isn't a perfect world and that humans sometimes do take advantage of other humans. We can stand firm against that and simply not allow it. For instance, if somebody's being picked on in a primary or intermediate classroom, teachers can just very easily say, so-and-so is my student, and all of my students have a right to come here and be treated well. We're going to respect each other, and that's that. You know, it's a very simple thing in a way, but it's a powerful thing if you hear that as a student. And then there are consequences if people are outside of that behavior. But we also have to ensure that discipline in these areas is designed to teach, not simply to be punitive. Because if we just go around hurting people they're going to be mad and they'll be looking to hurt somebody back, right? We have to be better than that. We have to lead.
Cyberbullying, though, shifts that conversation quite a bit, though. Like, when we think about cyberbullying, we think of, like, even when I was in school, and I'm from 1991, graduated in 2009, so cyberbullying, at least from my perception, wasn't as prevalent in high schools when I was there. It was starting to exist, but I know when I've talked to kids and I've looked on the news, I've seen that it has become like it's beyond the classrooms, beyond the school halls, it's beyond the locker rooms. It's now on the walk home. It's now in the school. It's now in the home. And I'm not saying that in Prince George is a pervasive problem, but do we, as a school district, address cyberbullying in particular?
We do. We absolutely do. And when we have incidences of it, we respond accordingly. It's a new tool, and it's perhaps a very attractive tool because immature people, and perhaps even grown-ups sometimes, have a hard time realizing that it can be real, right? So if I just say something when I text, or I just say something when I email, it's, you know, I didn't say it to your face. It wasn't that physical or real. So it's sometimes easy for students to lose perspective on what it actually is and means. And of course, it's never been so easy. The gossip of 25 or 30 years ago had a bit of a limit. The gossip today can go global in, what, 30 seconds?
Yeah.
So we have more to teach in school, but we do teach cyber safety, and we provide information to parents. When I have 3 grown children and a daughter who's currently in grade 4. And when I was raising the other 3, the advice was make sure the computer's in the family room so you know what your children are doing. Well, of course, now the computer's on their wrist or in their pocket. Things have changed, but the same rules apply. You need to talk to your children and to model good behavior and to know what they're doing online. It's kind of the same parenting skills, just in a different context.
My last question, I guess, to you is, what are some of the big things that you're looking forward to in this next coming up year? And what are the things that you want to make sure that people know about this School District 57 is doing?
That's a big one, because we are very excited about a number of things in School District 57. We want all of our students to do very, very well. School District 57 has a proud history of many students doing very well. British Columbia has a proud history of many, many students. Its current statistics, many, many students are doing well. Not every student is doing well. And you know, if any of the viewers want to go to our website and read our strategic plan, we'd love that, because that is the blueprint for our work 2016 to 2021. We've made commitments to reach every student, to ensure that every student is doing well. And we have a big focus on literacy and numeracy. We know we have some schools where students may not have had as many early learning experiences as other students, and we're targeting, again, that word, but really focusing resources in those areas and teacher training in those areas around some very explicit teaching of reading and mathematics, and we believe it's going to make a difference for those young people.
So lots of exciting things coming up, hey?
Those are exciting. We also have great partnerships with our community, and the Transform curriculum has a renewed focus on transitions from K to 12 into post-secondary and into the world of work. We have career education that's mandated, and we are very excited to be using My Blueprint, which is it's an online tool. It's a software program where students are able to put their portfolios, to explore jobs. Parents can work on it with students, teachers can work on it with students, and it travels with them. So you start in grade 7, and you use it every year with career education and planning your future until you graduate and move into something else. So we think that over time that's going to be a big help to our kids.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. I greatly appreciate seeing you today.
Thanks for having me.
Our thanks to Marilyn Marquis-Forster. Let me know who you want to see come on the show by tweeting me at Grant Bachand. You can also go to our Facebook page by going to Facebook/PGUpClose. Till next time, thanks for watching.